Hi, I'm Michael Rogers, and I visited the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz yesterday, and I wanted to kind of document both for myself and for, well, you Twitter followers, my day. Because obviously it's not something that everyone does, and although a lot more people are going to visit Auschwitz, it's still not that common, and I thought I'd share some of my experiences because, you know, it's not going to be like a textbook reading it. It's interesting to hear someone else's experiences from visiting. So, I only went for one day, so it was quite an intense experience to have the travel and experience both Auschwitz 1 and Auschwitz 2 in one day and kind of bring that all home and take it in. And that's why I think it's still processing in me now. I'm still thinking about it and it's still sinking in, which is partially why I'm doing this, to kind of collect my thoughts. But the first place we visited was the town of Auschwitz, which is the Polish name of Auschwitz. And we sort of walked around there for a bit, went inside the synagogue. But the first main place we went was Auschwitz 1, which was not initially an extermination camp, as much as I hate to use the word extermination in that sense, but it was a work camp with quite large barracks. And we went in there, and one of the first exhibitions we saw after going there underneath the famous Arbeit macht frei sign was of the human hair in its abundance, and also the shoes and suitcases and belongings of the victims of the Holocaust. And it's such a shock. You can't put it into words, just how much hair there is and how many shoes there are. You go into a corridor and either side, behind glass panels, are just these piles of shoes, and it's quite a long corridor. And then we're told that this was about 5% of the people who were victims of Auschwitz, not just the whole Holocaust, just Auschwitz. And you think, this is such a large amount of shoes, and it kind of really helps you picture how many people it was that died. And then after that, we went to the gas chamber. There was only one in Auschwitz 1, and it's actually one of the only gas chambers, if not the only, I think, remaining. Because towards the end of the war, the SS destroyed many of the gas chambers to hide the evidence of the Holocaust. And we went inside it, and Auschwitz 1 was actually where not so many Jews, but Poles, communists, homosexuals were kept, and 60,000 people were killed in the gas chamber that I went inside. And that's quite a shocking thing to think that I've been in this room where 60,000 people died, and a percentage of that, and it's quite uncertain how many, were gay. And it was quite strange to think that the only thing that was different between me and those people is time. I was born a century later, when I was visiting in a world where we're a lot more equal, and yet in that very same room, people were being gassed to death for loving someone who they were naturally born to love. And that really upset me, actually, to think that I could be killed for being who I am, being in that room where it happened. That was one of the main things that really brought the Holocaust home to me and made it very personal. And we then went into the crematorium, which was next door to the gas chamber. And that too was just horrific to think of the victims of that, their innocence, and being actually in there where they were cremated, and it really does, you can't describe it. It was horrendous. And I was sort of in awe, or not awe, in shock at just how It was there, it happened. You know, you read it in a textbook and you think that's awful, but you're there in the place that it happened. You can't describe it. And after we'd been to Auschwitz 1, we went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the death camp where most of the Jews in the Holocaust died, I believe. Or most of the people in the Holocaust died. And there's the train tracks that run right through it towards the end, where there are 2 crematoria. And when you walk in, we went up the watchtower, and you just kind of get this image of how large it is and how many people would have been there at the time. And that was, again, just horrible to think of the number of people. And we went around just walking into the barracks to see the conditions that these people were living in. And the barracks, just to give you some kind of information, were originally prefabricated stables for horses, where they'd be able to keep 50 odd horses in them, and up to 1,000 men or women would be kept in these barracks. And you think you'd struggle to get 100 people sleeping in there, and yet they had 1,000. And again, it's just unreal. You can't picture it. You know, you're there, but you still can't acknowledge that fact because it's so unreal. And we went to the remains of the crematoria, which were destroyed by the SS, and given quite graphic accounts of what would happen when you'd arrived. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do a reading at a memorial service that the Holocaust Education Trust put on at the end of the day at the memorial in Auschwitz-Birkenau at the end of the railway line, which is elevated, and I stood up there and read a poem. It was quite a short poem, but that was a really special opportunity for me. And I'm so glad that I was able to do that. And then after we'd had a little ceremony, we had candles that we lit and were told to place where we wanted on the camp. So I got my lit candle and walked the length of the pathway from the end to the entrance gate, the railway, between the tracks on the sleepers, and that was quite horrible, thinking that I was standing on the spot where people say goodbye to their families and where SS guards would just carelessly point left or right to death or to work, and to think that was the point where people left their families and never saw them again. Those people were condemned to death, and I was stood there on that same spot 60 odd years later, and it feels so wrong that I'm allowed to be there and come home and live my life now, and they weren't. So, and then I put my candle down and we went home, and ever since then it's been sinking in. But those are my 2 most poignant experiences, being in the gas chamber and walking the length of the railway. But one final experience was we walked past a little memorial within one of the bunkers in Auschwitz 1, and it had an urn in there with what looked like sand in it. It was see-through, but you knew what it was. And then our tour guide said that in that urn were the ashes of some of the victims of the Holocaust that had been discovered. And it was quite horrible seeing those ashes, because they're there, you know, that was people. And there's just no words to describe how upsetting it is. But I think one important thing to bring back from it is doing things like this and kind of spreading the message and making sure that the Holocaust isn't forgotten, because it is becoming more ancient history. Not ancient, but it's not modern history. Children now don't have grandparents who they can talk to about the war, and you know, we might be the last generation left to be able to experience Holocaust survivors. I was lucky enough as part of this project to meet a Holocaust survivor. But it's more important than ever that we take that message on and spread it for the next generation, because it can't happen again. And looking today at the viral spreading of this Joseph Kony person and the atrocities that he's committing, it just shows that there is inhumanity continuing throughout the world, and it's up to us to change that. Nobody stood up for the Jews in Europe, and look what happened there. No one stood up for the gays in Europe. No one stood up for the Poles, for the communists. They were taken away and slaughtered. And there's no reason to say that if this was to happen again, that it would be the Jews. There could be the Holocaust of anyone. And so remembering that is important to preventing it. So I would recommend, if you ever get the chance, to take it if you can go to Auschwitz, because it's an experience that I'll never forget, and it's an experience that will stay with me forever. I'll never forget my trip to Auschwitz. Thank you for watching this, and I really hope that I can help you to try and understand the Holocaust a bit more. And if you have any questions about my day, feel free to tweet me or DM me, and I'll answer them, because I think what I'd love to do now is talk a lot more about my visit, and I'll be certainly doing that within school and on Twitter if you want to ask. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.